Hello, friend. So the topic of this video will be self-forgiveness, as I happen to see a comment on Facebook asking about it, so I figured let's make a video. Unfortunately, at this point, I haven't put up explanations and tutorials and demonstrations for many of the processes that I'll be using during counseling or during guidance and coaching. However, you'll be able to still use certain parts of this offering as well in the future. When those other videos are up, you'll have those as your resources as well. So there's different elements to approach when you're considering not just self-forgiveness, but we'll say any of these things that we're working on and we're trying to process. We're trying to understand how to move this emotion and this energy out or reintegrate it would be another understanding. Have it change its form so that it serves us instead of hinders us. So processing it is a piece of it. But learning to change our mind about the situation will stop creating that emotion. So it's not just necessarily changing your mind about it. Changing your mind about it is helpful, and that'll stop creating more of that emotion that a person would be suppressing if they didn't know how to process it. But let's also be aware that there's ways to process things too. So there's a couple approaches that a person can consider. If you're working on the mindset, you don't necessarily need to understand the details of the situation that you are actively trying to correct or replace. Meaning, focus on where you are going, not where you have been. So although we could all think of situations, if we wanted to find something like this, we could all find situations that might suggest a reason for us to feel guilt or shame and require that self-forgiveness. And if we have that mindset of looking for those things, we're sure to find them. So we have to adjust our mindset there and begin to have a mindset of looking what serves us. Everybody in this world makes mistakes, but we often make these mistakes because we don't know how to do any better. And we're doing the best we can in that moment. So we make those choices. And if we learn from it, there's no benefit of shame or guilt because we made that error. So when we learn that there's no value in the game or in the guilt or shame, that alone will serve as inspiration to look for a different response. Understanding that now we know better, we don't have to remain in the woe is me or the guilt or the shame response to an error, because it doesn't serve you. All it serves is your suffering. And if you're inspired not to suffer, then you've got to actively make the effort to have a different mindset, to have a different response. There's also different mindset approaches. Look at this response currently, if you're working on self-forgiveness. Look at this, what's become a natural guilt, shame response. And notice how it's become consistent now. It's become the default. Because there's a seed that has been planted into your mindset, and it's been tolerated, and it hasn't been replaced. So now when you review that situation in your mind, the response that's encouraged by the mind is the seed that was planted, and that is the guilt and the shame. So if you never replace that seed, if you never if you do not plant a different response, you're going to continue to receive that guilt and shame response. So you have to make the efforts when that guilt and shame comes up, not to identify with the guilt and shame. Identify with forgiveness now, in this moment. Choose it. It might not feel natural at the beginning because the current seed that's planted and the current program that's running is offering that guilt and shame. So it might feel almost like you're pretending, hey, that it's all right. But really all you're doing, it seems like you're pretending, but you're planting a different seed so that something new can grow, something new can manifest. You don't need to even necessarily, this is a spiritual understanding, you don't need to even necessarily actively plant anything new. You just need to focus on surrendering the natural response or the current response, which is guilt and shame, and eventually just peace will replace it. As long as you don't invest in guilt and shame and tell that story and engage it and create that emotion, it's not energized, and eventually it's not. You have to invest in these seeds to replant them. So if guilt and shame is your current seed, is your current program, and it comes up, you think of that situation, and the mind offers you guilt, the suggestion of guilt and shame, and if you do not invest in it, if you do not identify with it and follow the story, you surrender it, you cut it off. You're beginning to remove that response. You may have to do this for a period of time, but recognize when you've done it once, recognize in your experience that you now have the ability to do this. You have the ability to surrender guilt and shame. This is where beliefs don't necessarily serve us. But if we look at our experience, we can say, yes, we changed our mind about, we had an initial response, and we actively changed our mind about that response and went a different route. So instead of accepting the default suggestion of the mind, we are surrendering it if it's negative, if it's unnurturing, if it's not love, and we're replacing it. We could just surrender it completely and it will just achieve peace. But if it helps you to instead say a positive affirmation, then that's helpful as well. A positive affirmation might be, I forgive myself. I love myself. I am worthy. I don't encourage affirmations like, I do not feel shame. I do not feel guilt. Instead, say, I feel love. Focus on the good, don't affirm with a negative of the bad. Okay, so that's one thing we can be doing with the mind. Meditation is valuable and powerful as well, because it helps us go to a quiet place and just be alone with the mind and understand the mind a little bit better and see that these offerings of the mind come up, and in that moment we can practice cutting the identification off to them. So that's all self-realization meditation is, and that's what mind healing meditation is in my respect anyways, in my approach. And it's you just sit there for the period of time that you're going to choose, and as any ideas come to mind, you surrender them. You let go any investment, any identification with them. And this is allowing you to practice and develop the ability to surrender. So in the future, when you are not meditating and a negative mindset comes up, you've already practiced surrendering, and now you've developed the ability, and now outside of meditation, you can surrender these negative responses quicker and quicker and quicker. And so you're no longer mindless and reckless and running on default. Now you're actively paying attention to your experience of what consciousness is creating, and you're becoming the driver of it, rather than in the back seat letting it drive, letting all the default planted seeds create your experience. Another thing I'll touch on outside of the mind is the experiences and the feelings, emotions or feelings that we feel in our body. So if a person is experiencing guilt and shame and they're working on self-forgiveness, it's not so much what the mind is doing to them at that moment. If you pay attention to your experience, investigate your experience, when you have a negative thought, it's not the thought that's unpleasant. It's the emotions / feelings meaning sensations in the body that are created from that thought. So if you have a negative thought of guilt and shame, it creates a feeling or emotion in the body. And it's those feelings that feel uncomfortable. For example, when somebody is really angry, if they would take a moment to focus on their body, they might see tightness in the chest, tightness in the hands, constricted breathing. These are all sensations, and actually feel it. You want to get to the point where you're not labeling it, but right now we're labeling it so that we are aware that there actually are sensations that are symptoms. These sensations and feelings are symptoms of the initial thought of guilt or shame. All thoughts have a sensation. But when you're working on guilt and shame and self-forgiveness, you want to also feel your feelings, because as you feel that energy, as you lean into it and you allow yourself to experience the sensation, it allows the sensation to, a lot of groups explain it as integrate, rebalance, find harmony, get unstuck, open up, flow. So, when somebody's feeling these negative energies, they're stagnant, they're stuck, they're stiff, they're rigid, they're tense. If you allow yourself to stay with the experience of that sensation, that emotion, you'll be able to see that it's moving, it's opening, the energy is flowing. So anything that somebody's working on guilt or shame with, they've already got that guilt and shame, that thought has already created an emotion, which is a sensation, a feeling in the body. And the idea is just to feel. You want to get the mind, once you experience the sensation and the feeling, you want to cut the mind right out at this point. And you don't want to continue to tell the story, because if you continue to tell the story, you create more of that feeling. So if you have a feeling of guilt and shame, a sensation in the body that's created of guilt and shame, and you keep thinking those thoughts, you create more and more and more of that uncomfortable situation. So the way to stop creating more is to stop identifying with that thought when it comes up. The more you stew in it, the more of this sensation you create. So we've already addressed the mind part of it and how we're going to adjust the mental part. But now to feel the feeling, it's as simple as, have you heard the idea of what you resist persists? So if you get an uncomfortable sensation in your body and you describe it as uncomfortable and you're like, you don't like it, you're saying you're giving your mind a negative response to it, like, I don't like this, I don't like this. You're basically causing a resistance. You're almost like cutting off consciousness to it. We're going to do the exact opposite. We're going to bring consciousness directly to that. And you're going to allow yourself to feel any sensations that come up in your body. You can also just focus on the strongest ones at that moment. And this is a way just to learn how to process emotions. When it's a very pleasant meditation, form of meditation. But you just feel it and continue to breathe. You don't want to stop the breath because the breath is helping massage and keep energy moving. If you hold the breath, it kind of stagnates energy as it is. So you want to continue to breathe. Continue to breathe. I'll get into this deeper when I demonstrate this actual practice, but I'm doing this enough at this point so that somebody who hears this can actually begin to practice it. So just remain feeling that feeling. That's why they're called feelings. That's how they're processed. That's how they're healed. Just continue to feel it. Don't allow the mind to say anything negative about it, because if you say anything negative about it, it's going to create that. It's going to create more of it. That's what's created it in the first place. So you want to keep the mind blank. There's an additional technique that I use, that I teach, where as you're feeling this sensation, you begin to say things like, this sensation feels so good. As you're feeling the sensation, you're repeating that. This sensation feels so good. I love you. Thank you. And just feel it. This sensation feels so good. What do you think the vibration of thank you and I love you is opposed to guilt and shame? If guilt and shame lock you right up, what do you think love and thank you do? It's the exact opposite end of the spectrum, right? And it may take time to do a shift, but I would actually encourage doing something like this for a period of 5 to 10 minutes daily. Do it on an empty stomach, because a lot of our digestive organs is what stores these emotions of worry and fear and shame and guilt. And if we've got food or a meal, even water, anything in our digestive system, those organs are trying to do work on the food and the fluids that are in there. And when we're taking our attention and we're basically kind of energetically detoxing these organs when we're doing this process that I'm explaining by feeling. So you don't want to disturb anything that's unnecessary. So make time for this, a couple minutes before bed, even in bed. even if you're doing it right before bed. I prefer to be doing it upright because I notice personally all practices seem to just work better, even just general meditation. Spine straight, being upright just seems to be the preferred practice. All right, and the more that you undo of this emotion, when you have another stress or shame thought, there's less of that energy built up now because you've processed it to a degree. So the next time it comes up, it has less of an emotional buildup, so it has less of an effect. What you're doing is you're opening the valve and letting this stuff release and change. By feeling it, you're changing something negative into something serving. So you're getting that chi restored. Chi is just energy, that prana, that life force. It was stuck and it was uncomfortable and it was affecting you in that negative way. And when you feel it and you love it and you're thankful for it and you truly feel it rather than resist it, you just restore it back to yourself. You never lost it. You just kind of put a brake on it. The body put a brake on it. This is karma 101. You have a negative thought, guess what? It affects you. And it gets stuck in you. And if you don't process it, you move forward with that. And you move forward with that in your mindset. So if you never process guilt, you'll see that guilt just accumulates and accumulates and accumulates and accumulates. And you have worse and worse reactions to it because there's more and more uncomfortable emotion stored in the body that's waiting to be processed. All right, so I feel that's sufficient at this moment in time. Again, I am doing coaching now, guidance. If self-forgiveness, guilt, shame, negative responses is something you're becoming aware that you're struggling with, and you are inspired to get help, I'm willing to work with you as time and convenience shows itself. I want to mention as well, for somebody who has PTSD, this is just an example. Say somebody's been in the war and they've seen something that their mind labeled negative, without getting into details. If a person if they are actually taught how to process the feeling, just to process the emotion, and they go back to that thought, they no longer have PTSD. They no longer have that response that they had before. Because the problem isn't in the thought. The thought is only the cause, but the symptom was the problem, and that was the feeling that the thought created. And this is how our whole lives work, is by our thoughts are the creators. We are the creators, so our thoughts are creating our experience. And if we're going to allow ourselves to tolerate and accept negative mindsets, it only works one way. You're going to have a negative experience. It doesn't work any other way. If you have a sad thought, you don't experience joy and peace, you experience sadness. If you have a peaceful thought, you don't experience hate, you experience peace. So as simple as that sounds, why aren't you applying it? Why isn't everybody you know applying it? Why have they missed something that's so simple? Because it's not put in front of us. The opposite is put in front of us in culture and by many of our influences, right? So we have an opportunity right now to learn something and change the rest of our lives I say that with conviction because these understandings that I've gained, I wouldn't trade for anything in this whole world. This to me is the most empowering information I've ever come across. And I've seen it transform other people that are willing to apply it. All it takes is the willingness to apply it. And if you don't have the willingness to apply it, knowledge isn't power. Application of knowledge is power. So if you're not willing to apply it, you're stuck with what you get on default. And default, just look around and you'll see what default gets you. How many peaceful, unconditionally loving, grateful people do you have in your experience? We see parts of those things in people to a degree, but is that their largest expression? But I'll trust that this offering finds the ears of those ready for it. I love you. You are completely capable of making this shift. Don't allow your mind to fool you that this is something that is difficult or something you cannot achieve. It is very simple. It's very simple. And if you need me to re-explain it to you, I'm happy to do so. All right. Have an awesome day. Think loving thoughts, and I'll talk to you soon, my friend.